Assalamu alaikum everyone. Inshallah we're continuing from Surah Baqarah verse 220 this week. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم في الدنيا والآخرة ويسألونك عن اليتامى قل إصلاح لهم خير وإن تخالطوهم فإخوانكم والله يعلم المفسد من المصلح ولو شاء الله لأعنتكم إن الله عزيز حكيم ولا تنكحوا المشركات حتى يؤمن ولا أمة مؤمنة خير من مشركة ولو أعجبتكم ولا تنكحوا المشركين حتى يؤمنوا ولعبد مؤمن خير من مشرك ولو أعجبكم أولئك يدعون إلى النار والله يدعو إلى الجنة والمغفرة بإذنه ويبين آياته للناس لعلهم يتذكرون ويسألونك عن المحيض قل هو أذى فاعتزلوا النساء في المحيض ولا تقربوهن حتى يطهرن فإذا تطهرن فأتوهن من حيث أمركم الله إن الله يحب التوابين ويحب المتطهرين نساؤكم حرث لكم فأتوا حرثكم أنى شئتم وقدموا لأنفسكم واتقوا الله واعلموا أنكم ملاقوه وبشر المؤمنين ولا تجعلوا الله عرضة لأيمانكم أن تبروا وتتقوا وتصلحوا بين الناس والله سميع عليم صدق الله العظيم.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Inshallah, we read the translation here, bearing in mind that there is a continuation in meaning from what is before. That is to say, in the ayah about al-khamr wal-maisir, about wine and gambling, there is a kind of connection here, as Allah Azza wa Jalla says that He presents His signs to you so that you may reflect. And then the next ayah begins, fi dunya wal akhirah. So one may, understand that this is separated in terms of the ayah, partly for reasons of sound, that لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَفَكَّرُونَ, sounds like the end of an ayah. So many among our predecessors considered this to be, where the ayah ends. And then fi dunya wal akhirah as the beginning of the next ayah. There were some others who, because of the connection and meaning, considered this to be part of the previous ayah. And that's why sometimes we have these small differences in this matter. Right? I'm sorry that the screen keeps flitting between different...
Just while you answer, it's just also a reminder that the Jumhur opinion is, the majority's opinion is that when the verses finish and when they start is a tawqifi matter, something that the companions or the Prophet was informed through some sort of revelation. Because this happens in a few number of places and it always catches my interest. Why did the verse stop there? But like you said, what's called muhafazat ru'us al-ayat, maintaining the, I don't want to use the word rhyme, but we know what we mean, that similar sounding pattern. That could be one of the main reasons. But it's just a mystery or a thing of interest for me.
Yeah, so this is just because, we have divided our lessons into pages. So then we had this one unfortunate case where it doesn't work out too well because we have to explain all of that because we've lost what we were looking at last time, right? Although I can, of course, pull that up here. In this way, God makes his revelations clear to you, so you may reflect on this world and the next, right? So on the matters of this world and the next. They ask you about the property of orphans. Say it is good to set things right for them. If you combine their affairs with yours, remember they are your brothers and sisters. God knows the difference between those who spoil things and those who improve them. Had he so willed, he could have left you in hardship. God is almighty and wise. Do not marry idolatresses until they believe. A believing slave woman is certainly better than an idolatress, even though she may please you. And do not give your women in marriage to idolaters until they believe. A believing slave is certainly better than an idolater, even though he may please you. Such people call you to the fire while God calls you to the garden and forgiveness by his leave. He makes his revelations clear to people so that they may bear them in mind. They ask you, Prophet, about menstruation. Say, menstruation is a painful condition, so keep away from relations with your women during it. Do not approach them until they are pure. When they have purified, you may approach them as God has directed you. God loves those who turn to him, and he loves those who keep themselves pure. Your wives are like your fields, so go to your fields whichever way you like, and send something good ahead for yourselves. Be mindful of God, remember that you will meet him. Prophet, give good news to the believers. Believers, do not allow your oaths in God's name to hinder you from doing good, being mindful of God and making peace between people. God hears and knows everything. So I'll pause here for our initial explanations, inshallah.
Maybe I can start. So the first verse talks about the orphans and I guess their food and how they should be engaged. There's prayer verses like from Surah chapter 6 verse 152 where it says, "And come not near the orphan's property except to improve it." And then there's another verse which talks about similar thing where it says, "Verily those who unjustly eat up the property of orphans, they eat up only fire into their bellies, and they will be burnt in the blazing fire." So there's a bit of a prior context that Ibn Kathir goes into before this verse, and then this verse comes as well. So people were getting so concerned that they would either let them eat their food or they'll just let it spoil so that they don't want to eat or consume the orphan's food. So then this verse talks about combining. What did it say again? So I'm just going back to the verse.
If you combine their affairs with yours.
So if you combine it, they're your brothers, they're your sisters. So kind of allowing the combining of the food and what they have as well, but obviously to improve it with that condition. So yeah. And there's a narration from Aisha radiallahu anha. She says, "I dislike that an orphan's money to be under my care unless I mix my food with his food and my drink with his drink." So yeah.
So the broader context as well, of course, is the importance of caring for the orphans and being cautious about how you treat them, because in the Jahiliyyah there were certain practices which were unacceptable, certain exploitation, and so there was the possibility of going to kind of the flip side of that, where you become overly cautious when you see the warnings in certain parts of the Qur'an. And yes, some of that was actually probably revealed later, like in Surah An-Nisa, those who consume the property of the orphans, they are consuming fire into their bellies. So some reports indicate that the Sahaba, when they heard this, then they became very anxious, and then Allah revealed this. But that might not work entirely chronologically. It might be more that at that point they were reminded about this, or this ayah was brought to bear in clarifying the situation. That, don't be overly cautious. Allah Azza wa Jal knows the difference. He will see that if you are, approaching this with the right intentions, even if other people might judge you wrongly or misunderstand your intent, Allah knows what you are doing. And likewise, if you actually have malintent, Allah will certainly know that and will hold you to account for it. So take that ease that He has provided you, and be grateful also for that ease that He has provided you, because He could have decreed otherwise and made things very difficult. But this deen is built upon facilitating these higher purposes, which include, preserving the rights of the orphan.
Yeah, so I think here, this verse, like Ustadh Sohaib, Ustadh Ahmed said, is like a rukhsa in a way, a type of dispensation that, the Meccan verses, the way it was dealing with orphans, don't approach it except for illa billatihi ahsan. If that was too difficult, even the beginning of this verse, only if you're seeking islah lahum, for them, means you should only want, Imam Baqai says, good for them, even if it means as the difficulty of the carer. But then at a second level, if you mix with them, and that has been interpreted as marrying them, or some sort of other interaction, perhaps, in my mind, like a joint investment or a business venture came to mind, I'm not sure. Then you do act in a way that it's for both of your benefit. And then that hadith that of Sayyidina Aisha that Imam Ahmet, Ustadh Ahmed mentioned. And because the moment you mix, as we know, the Quran talks about, and at least in business partners, it's so difficult to distinguish between what's right and what's wrong. God knows what's right, what's wrong. In terms of munasabat, Imam Bukhari says that because the inevitable consequence of jihad is people will be left as orphans, that's why this matter is brought up in here. And at the beginning about this world and the next, in a way, it's as if it can be applied to all the yas'alunakas, about all the dealing with the orphans and the wine, the gambling. Allahu Alam.
Right. So, of course, we have here a sequence of ayat that are touching on issues to do with marriage as well. There could be a hint in it, as you said, as one of the aspects that is indicated within this ayah. And then the next ayah, of course, addresses this directly. And then some things to do with our relations within the home between husband and wife. And then we are going to have this shift into the discussion about divorce via the case of oaths and how oaths are used in connection with this as well. So this very famous ayah about not marrying unbelievers. In this, Ibn Ashur is of the point of view that al-mushrikat, al-mushrikeen, this is referring to the known category of the idolaters, of Mecca, or those who are like them in religion. So this ayah then is not directly talking about Ahl al-Kitab in his view. There are some of the scholars who had a view that they would be included within the generality of its words, that do not marry also women from the people of the book, or indeed men from the people of the book. And then we have other evidences, including, of course, the ayah in Surah Al-Ma'idah, which gives permission for Muslim men to marry Kitabi women, so Jewish or Christian women. So there are some who see that as modifying or abrogating that aspect of this verse, because in the first place they said shirk, the Christians are also committing shirk, aren't they, when they do, when they have Trinitarian beliefs, and the Jews also have shirk when they say Uzayrun ibn Allah. But you can see some sort of shakiness in this proposition. Of course, in the surah we encountered some shirk from Bani Israel when they worship the calf and so on. But saying that Ezra is the son of God is not a sort of common statement amongst all the Jews. So this point of view that this includes Ahl Kitab and then they're excluded by other evidences is, in Ibn Ashur's view, not the stronger one. Rather, this ayah is talking about the mushriks, and then the issue about marrying kitabis is taken from elsewhere. And as we know, there is consensus on the matter that yes, a Muslim man may marry from the people of the book. Some consider that disliked. This is some of the Imams and the Maliki school Ibn Ashur mentions. But the reverse, that is to say, a Muslim woman marrying a Muslim man is not allowed, by consensus. And it would fall under the sort of general point here about preserving the marital relation within the religion, within the deen of Islam, right? So the contrast here is made, between, maybe someone is in a position, a social, a lower social position, that's to say they are enslaved, but they are a mu'mina. This raises their status above someone who might be a free woman, but she's a mushrika, right? And likewise, for the male slave, if he is a mu'min, he is above and preferable to one who is a mushrik, even if he is of high social status, right? And all of those, the people of shirk, you're going to get yourself in a situation where you will end up in the fire with them, right? But instead, you are to take the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His forgiveness.
It actually, the other tafsir actually mentions the reason of revelation, and says it talks about Abu Marsad as one of the Sahabi who had an acquaintance with a woman in Mecca before, and then he migrates to Medina. The Prophet sends him on a mission to Mecca, and then this woman sees him and invites him to have intimacy with her. But he says, I can't, my religion forbids it. She goes, okay, then marry me. He goes, I'm not too sure about that either. It comes back to the Prophet ﷺ, and then the tafsir says that this verse gets revealed, and he's not given permission to marry with this woman. Yeah.
That's interesting, because I was actually wondering, does this verse imply that marriage with polytheist women were allowed for Muslims in the Meccan period? I mean, we can't always take mafhum mukhalaf. I know the opposite meaning, but that bit of seerah data you shared was interesting.
I mean, it would have just been happening regardless of allowed or not allowed. Whether new contracts occurred, I don't know, but they would have had the prior marriages. So there was a need then for this to shift towards a new situation. Of cutting off those marriages, and there are a few different places in the Quran where these issues come up. Surah Mumtahana is a particular.
I think it was with that surah that the Sahabi, the companions who had non-believing women, they divorced their women at that time. Allahu Alam, from what I recall.
وَلَا تُمْسِكُوا بِعِصَمِ الْكَوَافِرِ. Yeah, this is one of those places which then establishes this.
Okay. In terms of munasabat, Imam Baqai connects this to the verse that allows intimacy and fasting. And so sometimes it's interesting, he connects munasabat to something that's like 5 pages before. And I think that's common in tafsir. Even, I'm sure Ustadh Sohaib has unique cases of ataf where it goes back a few pages, or even different surahs. Sure. I don't know. You see this. But he says over there, the matter of intimacy was addressed because of its immediate importance in fasting, where the contract was delayed, and now these verses are going to deal with the contracts. Now, the word nikah, just as us non-Arabs, we use it very comfortably, but amongst Arabs, they're very shy when you say that, so we should be a bit careful, because it's almost like a swear word. Not a swear word, a very rude word.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to be careful. Because this is one of these things that happens almost every day on Twitter. Someone makes a big post about how Desis or non-Arabs are wrong to use the word nikah, and this is pure ignorance.
That's right.
The Quran uses the word nikah throughout for the aqd, and this is the Quranic language. And if Arabs are Arabs, then they follow the Quranic language. If they have transferred it to some other meaning, then they're the ones who need to fix up. And we don't have to be shy about the word nikah.
Well, it's
unless you want
interesting.
to forget the
Imam Bukhari says the literal meaning means the intercourse, sexual intercourse. However, the Sharia meaning, the terminological meaning, which is the contract, became so dominant that he says it became the literal meaning. And so every time it's mentioned, we take the contract in mind, and then the intercourse meaning becomes the majazi meaning. So it was an interesting case where he actually makes an argument similar to what you're saying. But just to give context, sometimes that's why they have words like ketbul kitab and other things. It's almost like saying
they can call it whatever they like, but we have to be clear on how Allah Azza wa Jal calls it. And when non-Arabs use the term, they should not be. I mean, I'm saying this defensively because it's like almost every day someone posts exactly the same point on Twitter, and they laugh at non-Arabs in a racist way for their supposed ignorance of using the word nikah. And then the point is, that sounds funny to me. Oh, wallahi, I don't care. If it sounds funny to you, that's your ignorance, and we are not responsible for it. Speaking for the Ajam here, we're not responsible for the ignorance of some so-called native Arabic speakers who have forgotten the meaning of the word nikah. They got it mixed up with another word, which does have the meaning of intercourse. They mixed it up with this word as if, because there's some similar letters in another word, which is mustahjan, yani is kind of almost like a rude expression. Although that same word you can find in the title of books of ulama, like Imam Suyuti has got a book in Nawadur al-Aik. I will leave the rest just to not unnecessarily offend anyone. But there is, these things change over time as well. Like what can be considered rude at one time was not in another time. But anyway, there is a famous debate among the ulama as to which of them kind of came first, chicken or egg. Is it the intercourse or the
contract?
The starter or the main course, basically. Is it the contract or the consummation? But then in the Quranic usage, it is the contract that's been referred to.
I just said that because I've been in places where I've said it, and like the Arab brothers and sisters have just gone like that. But I can just imagine Ustadh Sohaib, when he gets told other names, he's going to.
I will.
I can just see you responding to them. Tilka al-asma'u samaytum antum aba'ukum. These are names you've created for yourselves. I really liked Imam Ibn Ashur's take on that verse, that it's not the most correct view that Ahl Kitab is not intended in this verse, because Imam Bukhari says the majority, says Akthar, do see Ahl Kitab coming under this verse, but then Surah Ma'idah verse number 5 is like more like specified, khustisa am. I personally find it very clear that the Quran always makes a distinction between al-Wathaniya, shirk, and Ahl Kitab. And so, but I wasn't going to say anything, but when you said Imam Bukhari said that, I really liked it.
Yeah, so it's a kind of like, the sort of a known term in the Quran, that in the Quranic wording, when it mentions alladhina kafaru as well, you know who it's talking about, alladhina amanu, who it's talking about. So Ibn Ashur is quite fixed on that view and doesn't really incline to when people might say, oh, in the previous ayah, didn't we say alladhina amanu, maybe could this include the kitabis? He's like, no. Alladhina amanu, we know what it means. Alladhina kafaru, we know what it means. Al-mushrikeen, al-mushrikat, we know what it means. And if sort of by extension other things apply, then so be it.
I mean, ultimately, Ahl Kitab is an honorific term, whereas Ahl Shirk or Mushrikun is definitely not. So, just in terms of Imam Bukhari makes a rational argument that this verse is one of the clearest verses that shows the greatness of freedom and being free and emancipated, as opposed to being slavery, because the rational argument is, even if they're a slave, just in case, because sometimes people might think, oh, what's wrong with it? Some people they have a misunderstanding. Just because Islam allows everything, they think we should just go back to that, and that's the ideal. It's like, because slavery is allowed and it doesn't exist, then it's my job to make ihya of slavery. I don't think you have to correct me, but some people feel like that. Anything Arabian 7th century or a bit pre-classical, pre-modern is the right way. So, but verses like this clearly show, and other verses too, that it's not the preferred thing. No. And then although the woman there's a chance for a woman, kafir, a woman to become Muslim by marrying a Muslim man. He says the whole principle of dar'ul mafasid, preventing harm, takes precedence over the acquisition of benefit. It's a slight example of this rule.
So then I guess we can address the next ayah then, which in terms of the connection, maybe al-Baqarah has something interesting here. Ibn Ashur says that in general it is about getting away from all the things that the mushrikeen were doing and their ways in general, so just to stay away from it, as this ayah that we just studied indicates. And the mushrikeen had been influenced also by Jewish practices. Now it's interesting, I just saw on the feed served me up a video a few days ago of this Jewish couple who were describing a contemporary approach, how they observe the rules of menstruation. And it was amazing. It was like a tafsir, or it was a tafsir of the tafsir that we have, because our books tell us about how the Jews were very, if I may say, extreme in the matter of seclusion during menstruation. And they were spelling it out in detail, but I may say with a somewhat apologetic bent, where they were emphasizing over and over again, it's nothing to do with being unclean. It's like a sacred state, so. But it was clearly also their take on it, or their spin on it, which I'm sure is open to debate or dispute. But it's interesting because, of course, Muslims as well, we sometimes do that. We over mix. We give a more that not just a charitable interpretation of things, but going further and sort of make everything empowering, when not everything is made that way. Like here, huwa adhan, there is a negativity, even if a soft one, attached to the state of menstruation, and that she is to become purified. But for Jewish people, there was a much stronger separation that they were describing in this video. And even when she is done, she has to go to a special place. I think they call it mikvah. They have to go to a special bathhouse to be cleansed. So in the Islamic, the dictates of these ayat, it is much, much simpler. The time period is much smaller. And there's nothing here about, okay, although you may take the literal words, فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ, you may, from the words themselves, get the same impression. But it is clarified in the Sunnah, in the Tafsir, in the example of the Prophet ﷺ, that it is specifically about not engaging in intercourse, right? But closeness, intimacy in that broader sense, right? Not with a capital I, is fine. And from the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jalla sending the Prophet to us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his openness through his companions and his wives to inform us of these things, allows us to know that he would have his wife, for example, washing his hair at this time, or there would be a closeness, but there would be also a limit to that during the time of menstruation. So the word adhan, it's obviously a very evocative word that is here translated as a painful condition. So there are other words that could be used. Ibn Ashur explains this by saying, there is a harm in it, but it is the lightest kind of word for harm. Like it's not an absolute disastrous thing, or don't overblow the thing. So there's an ayah which is لا يضركم إلا أذى. They will not cause you harm except a trifling level. So there is an instruction to not to not consummate marriage or to engage in sexual relations in the fullest sense until they're purified. There's a bit of discussion as to what is exactly indicated by these two words. Is it to is it the same thing both times? Some qira'as have the same word, يَطَّهَّرْنَا فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَا, whereas others say حَتَّى يَطَهُرْنَا فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَا. But one way or another, we come back to the same essential point, which is the bleeding or menstruation will stop, but then they are expected to engage in an act of purification, which is the ghusl, at which point marital relations may resume as normal. And the end of the ayah emphasizes the spiritual purity over the physical purity. So yes, we're talking about the physical purity, but in all of this, remember that what he loves the most is that we turn with our hearts to him, that we purify ourselves spiritually, while he is reminding you of the physical cleanliness as well.
It's a true mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And this is a time when women actually do need support, especially, emotional support, and they need perhaps their husbands around them. So that's, I guess, one thing you mentioned, Ustadh Sohaib, that the Muslims were being affected by the practices of the Jews. But another way that they were being affected was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and then approach them as God has directed you, which is the front private part. So the Jews would also not approach the woman from behind, still obviously from behind, but through the front private part. So the Muslim women were also impacted by that as well, but by the practice. So this verse kind of clarified that, and the Prophet was asked about it too. Basically it says, do anything you wish except having sexual intercourse during this time that the woman goes through. There's also other comments about that, while anal intercourse is forbidden, approaching woman from behind is permissible as long as it's through the front part.
One of the scholars had the statement that the front is for the rafath and the back is for the farath. Like poetic. So.
Oh. That's some deep linguistic.
It was nice. Just in terms of munasabat, Ustadh Sohaib, I think you're going to say something actually before I mention one.
Well, I was just going to say that there is, there are some views about min haythu amarakumullah, and indeed many of the scholars said, as you mentioned, Ibn Ashur's view is sort of a bit more broad. That is to say, then resume what Allah has instructed that you would do in the course of marriage, right? So it just means resume relations. But then certainly the next ayah then has this connection with the issue that you are talking about, even if it's not sort of directly addressing this question about what is the validity or rather invalidity of anal, right? This is kind of, if anything, it can be taken by implication, right? So when Allah Azza wa Jalla describes arth, there is a productivity in marital relations. It doesn't mean that it's exclusively for procreation, but that's at the core of its purpose and what we are created that way for. So from this and then other evidences, we would get that there are certain things which are off limits. However, that doesn't mean that only one thing is allowed, right? It's basically only one thing is disallowed. But many other things are allowed within the general permission of istimta' between a husband and wife, right? So it's a fiqh discussion is a bit separate, but in a way it's also like what we're seeing that the ayah is addressing directly versus how it can be used in certain other discussions or questions that come up.
Yeah, just in terms of munasabat, this verse following the previous verse, so this verse of sowing, if we call it the field and sowing the field, following the verse of the marriage contract in a type of ataf connection is most appropriate. Imam Baqai says, instead of if it had just started off brand new, istitnaf. So it's very linked, obviously. I think everyone can see that. And the question about the menstruation is not about menstruation itself, but being intimate during menstruation. I think that's also clear. Just the very end that I just mentioned, the last word, the mutatahhirin, and like Sohaib mentioned, with the different readings of that word yattahurna. In terms of learning Arabic, it's a good example of to know how each added level of letter, what's the saying? Kullama zada ala mabna zada fil ma'na, something like that. Every time you add a letter and there's forms of the verb, this is a good example. There's an extra meaning. So ending of the menses and the ghusl, and the fuqaha have debated. We won't go into that because we're covering 3 pages tonight. But at the end, the ta is brought back forth. Like the other times, it's sort of there's been idgham, and Imam Bukhari and Harali point to the difficulties struggle to require to keep oneself clean, and how Allah loves that. And the hadith was brought forward that the tawab, the constant turning, is used in this type of pattern to encourage repentance for those who may have committed sins and then made tawbah, but then they broke their tawbah because, either human weakness or whatever the reason is. And because if you constantly break your tawbah, you might fall into the trap of thinking, okay, well then God will not take my tawbah seriously because I'm obviously not serious. I'm a bit of a joke. God doesn't care for this. And then you leave tawbah like for good, to prevent that type of thinking, to think you're not even good enough to turn to God. And it's a bit of a way perhaps of Satan attacking us from the right. The tawwab is used constantly. And he brings the hadith that the Prophet said, لو لم تذنبوا لجاء الله بقوم يذنبون فيستغفرون فيغفر لهم. If you do not commit sin, Allah will come with the people who would commit sins and seek forgiveness, and he would forgive them. Yeah.
So this, I guess we can move to the next ayah if that's fine. 224.
Yeah, I think we kind of covered that 223 as well.
Okay.
Just for 223, وَقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُمْ. Here I have a narration that Abdullah bin Abbas understands this to mean intercourse, which I had never would have figured that out.
Yeah, so I think you can read it that way, but and some relate it to the issue of children as well. But Ibn Ashur's view is this is just a reminder about you can enjoy things in life, but busy yourself with good deeds. So Allah's giving you enjoyment, but life is not all about enjoyment. Don't spend 7 days of the week doing this, but rather be concerned with accruing good deeds and remember that you will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's like this merging of the everyday life and practical matters and physical matters with the spiritual direction of travel.
Yeah, because the verse might say, it's not about just indulge as much as your carnal desires, but also don't forget bringing that vertical reminder. That's a nice take on it. I like that, because otherwise, anyway, I guess we can accept both as long as if there's no opposition. Sometimes you can accept that meaning and that meaning.
Yeah, indeed.
Just to have Harali has a bit of a theory or a philosophy around marriage, and he mentions that this verse, and I won't mention it again, is that matters between a husband and wife are very private and secret. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, be mindful of God, remember that you'll meet him, and so on. All these, we can notice that it's much more predominant, these type of reminders in these verses than other verses in general. And he's sort of saying it's a reminder, don't try to always seek matters by going to the courts or, bringing things out to the open. A lot of these things, there are a lot of subtleties that no one knows but the husband and the wife. To whatever extent they can, as long as it's for their own good, they should keep some of those because they're clothes to one another. They should cover each other's secrets and auras, and Allah will judge them in the hereafter. And they should be very careful how they deal with each other, but perhaps not reveal it in a worldly sense. Unless, obviously, we have to put that caveat where there's extreme abuse and all that. That's a separate case. But they tend to constantly give this reminder that it's a matter of sir. And when it's a matter of sir, it should be dealt with in a secret way. But if it's in a matter of very open, then it should be dealt with in an open way. And they go into the subtleties of if there's harf ta'rif or no harf ta'rif. in justifying this reading. So they read this across the next 2 pages.
So the next ayah is not, let's say, directly about marriage. It's a general ayah, but there's a connection here that sort of leads into the discussion about divorce, because something's mentioned about oaths. Then there is something mentioned about a particular type of oath by which a man would swear off his wife indefinitely or for long periods of time. And then the proper modes of divorce are outlined. So there's this flow then, while delivering individual ahkam, which you can then take piece by piece as well. So here, believers do not allow your oaths in God's name to hinder you from doing good. So essentially, people where, the implication is then making an oath by Allah, Wallahi, I will not do such and such, and it was a good deed. Some have related this to something which happened with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, where he had sworn off giving to a certain relative of his who then had got involved in the slander against his daughter, our mother Aisha radiallahu anha. So then there's the verse in Surah An-Nur which is said to be addressing him as well. وَلَا يَأْتَلِي أُولُو الْفَضْلِ مِنْكُمْ وَالسَّعَةِ. So the word ila which comes in the next ayah, is used there for this thing. So it may be that both ayahs were revealed in this connection, or really the one in Surah An-Nur is more likely to be about Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and then this one might be in connection with other asbab or not. It doesn't have to be for a specific thing that prompted its revelation. But there was, this was happening. Sometimes people would use God's name and they would say, Wallahi, I will not do such and such. And Allah is saying, don't place Allah's name in this position. Of all people, if you swear by God to do good. Otherwise, your reason for not doing good is because I swore by Allah's name. Rather, Allah Azza wa Jalla would rather that you, if you did that, to break that oath. And there is an expiation, which is detailed elsewhere, for breaking an oath. But Allah would want that from you so that you do the good, because His name is not to be used in this way.
I had a young brother who was trying to get permission to go to Egypt to do some Islamic studies and Arabic, and made an oath to his mother that if she allows him to go this year, he won't go next year. But when the next year came, I said, look, just break your oath. So he ended up going again. But yeah, there's a hadith of the Prophet. He says, by Allah, it is more sinful to Allah that one of you implements his vow regarding severing the relations with his relatives than breaking his promise and paying the kafara that Allah has required in such cases. So
you can't be more clear than that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah, just I was going to mention in terms of what Ustadh Sohaib said, sometimes we have to understand the Arab way of doing things. They swore oaths a lot. Just like today, we swear a lot. And I guess the word swearing is both connected through that way. We swear a lot, they swore oaths a lot. And so sometimes they wouldn't, if there was like an implicit command for them to do something good, they couldn't get themselves to do it until they made it explicit by an oath in God's name. So it was sort of almost teaching them the psychology of, follow these commands, even if it's not as explicit as an oath. And there's this nice saying, Farasun la tajri illa bimihmazin bi'sal farasu. How bad is the horse which does not ride except through the spur of the rider? Yeah, and you don't always need oaths to take you to those extremes.
People online started to say like this, Wallahi, billahi, tallahi, and they do a whole sequence of oaths. I don't know who taught them all these huruf al-qasam, but they should.
In which community did you say? The Turkish community?
La, I said online. I didn't start naming.
I've heard that a lot in the Turkish community. The Turkish brothers and sisters, they use the 3 in a row. Like,
oh wow!
I was even a high school teacher with some Turkish students, and often I would hear that in the classroom. As if.
Yeah, I mean, it's like because as we can then address the next ayah then, because this is munasabah then, because
Yeah.
there is, of course, certain oaths. God will not call you to account for oaths you have uttered unintentionally, but He will call you to account for what you mean in your hearts. God is most forgiving and forbearing. I don't know if you want to take some time to read this page in Arabic as well. But this can address that sort of situation where, okay, it may not be good that you overuse Allah's name in this way, but those things, and then it's a question for the fuqaha, exactly where we draw the line or what falls into a serious oath versus an unserious oath. But if you said something, you didn't mean it as an oath, then that is not the thing that you'll be held to and pay kafara for. But you should actually be more conscious then about what you're saying, right? So that you don't get into this gray area of, do I owe expiation? But once you start using 3 huruf al-qasam, I think like you pass the level of level, because if you just said, wallahi, I did it, then okay, but wallahi, billahi, tallahi, it's like you're swearing 3 times in a court of law. Chill out, guys.
Yeah,
Chill
but
out.
Can I just admit something? I criticize the Turkish community, but in my own Afghan community or Farsi speaking, I didn't realize this till recently. The word swearing an oath by God has become so common that we say it in a way where it means indeed. Just like we say indeed. But they removed the last half, wallahi, we just say wallah. And then it just means as if, in actual fact, in reality. So, yeah, very bad un-Islamic habits some of our Islamic cultures have.
I mean, it sounds to me that would fall under lagwi fi aymanikum. That's to say, it became a matter of language and not something intended. Because then by the urf, it would be transported from the department of qasam to the department of ta'keed. That's how it looks to me.
It's interesting, Ustadh Sadeq, you're saying that, but the Prophet is saying actually, like, I mean, yes, people get used to saying these things in their daily language, but the people before Islam, they were swearing by Lat and Uzza, right? So the Prophet actually says, whoever swore and unintentionally mentioned Al-Lat and Al-Uzza in his vow should then say, there's no deity worthy of worship except Allah. This is, I think, the extreme that you could go to, right? So you're actually swearing by these deities without realizing, or not consciously. But even that, the Prophet is saying.
I've heard Muslims going, Jesus Christ. Like, excuse me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not, it's not exactly a qasam, but it's like taking in the first place. There's Christians who would say you're taking the Lord's name in vain. But then, as Muslims, you're taking a prophet's name. As what is this? What are you doing? But it's you see, culture and urf. It's just what we hear. And you didn't mean to invoke Jesus, but to be careful about your words and how they might be taken or how you might be accountable for them before Allah.
I heard a Muslim brother saying, and you'd be shocked to hear this. He was saying Wallati wal Uzza. But the reason why he said that was he was just so heavily influenced by the Omar series, especially Abu Jahl's character. He just really liked that Arabic. So,
oh no,
yeah, it was a bit of a danger. But it just goes to show you that, like Ustadh Ahmed was saying, they will live their whole lives saying those things. It's hard for them to get out of it. Hence the hadith to quickly say the kalima tawheed. Let alone a brother who's seen an episode or 30 episodes, let's say. And then he's become a habit for him.
Imagine watching an Islamic series and then coming out with this fa'idah.
We have in Australia, by the way, many non-Muslim, Anglo-Saxon Australians that nowadays say inshallah, mashallah. They even say wallah, like to say you really mean it.
I love that. But you see, of course, Allah is the true God of all of us. So. And different people of different religions have and continue to use the name Allah in the Arab world as well.
Yeah, just a reminder with this, and I don't want to go back to the previous verse, but just generally, let me make this point that it's a reminder not to also use God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and religion for matters that are not religious or for matters that are against religion. I've seen people sometimes use, and this is probably not directly related, but they use arguments of dawah or a cause or something better or religion, some sort of religious argument. And in their reality, they're actually hurting their wives and their families, and they're doing an injustice. But just, I sort of see in that verse, don't take Allah urdatan fi amanikum. Also, don't take religion generally as a cause to do more harm. Whenever you see the path of taqwa and less taqwa, go for the taqwa path. No.
طيب, okay. So let's then move on to the. Shall we read the page in Arabic as well? Because it feels wrong that we didn't do that. Shall I read it?
No, I'm
going to do it. Bismillah.
Imam Husari.
No promises of al-Husari. We'll just see what happens. لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما كسبت قلوبكم والله غفور حليم للذين يؤلون من نسائهم تربص 4 أشهر فإن فاءوا فإن الله غفور رحيم وإن عزموا الطلاق فإن الله سميع عليم والمطلقات يتربصن بأنفسهن 3 قروء ولا يحل لهن أن يكتمن ما خلق الله في أرحامهن إن كن يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر وبعولتهن أحق بردهن في ذلك إن أرادوا إصلاحا ولهن مثل الذي عليهن بالمعروف وللرجال عليهن درجة والله عزيز حكيم الطلاق 2 مرتان فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان ولا يحل لكم أن تأخذوا مما آتيتموهن شيئا إلا أن يخافا ألا يقيما حدود الله فإن خفتم ألا يقيما حدود الله فلا جناح عليهما فيما افتدت به تلك حدود الله فلا تعتدوها ومن يتعد حدود الله فأولئك هم الظالمون فإن طلقها فلا تحل له من بعد حتى تنكح زوجا غيره فإن طلقها فلا جناح عليهما أن يتراجعا إن ظنا أن يقيما حدود الله وتلك حدود الله يبينها لقوم يعلمون. Then you got a few Husari vibes there, unintentional, but because you mentioned his name. So we had read the first of these. For those who swear that they will not approach their wives, there shall be a waiting period up to 4 months. If they go back on it, God is most forgiving and merciful. But if they are determined to divorce, remember that God hears and knows all. Divorced women must wait for 3 monthly periods before remarrying, and if they really believe in God in the last day, it is not lawful for them to conceal what God has created in their wombs. Their husbands have the right to take them back during this period, provided they wish to put things right. Divorced women have rights similar to their obligations, according to what is fair, and the men have a degree of right over them, and God is almighty and wise. Divorce can happen twice, and each time wives can either be kept on in an acceptable manner or released in a good way. It is not lawful for you to take back anything that you have given your wives, except where both fear that they cannot maintain the marriage within the bounds set by God. If you arbiters suspect that the couple may not be able to do this, then there will be no blame on either of them if the woman opts to give something for her release. These are the bounds set by God to not overstep them. It is those who overstep God's bounds who are doing wrong. If a husband redivorces his wife after, that is to say, the second divorce, after the second divorce, she will not be lawful for him unless she first takes another husband. If that one divorces her, there will be no blame if she and the first husband return to one another, provided they feel that they can keep within the bounds set by God. These are God's bounds, which he makes clear for people who would know. So before the actual ahkam relating to divorce, there is this continuation of a point about the swearing and a practice that was, present there in the time of Jahiliyyah. There's some debate over whether it still could exist or what would happen if some people did this. But in general, this is not the way you're supposed to do things. You're not supposed to swear off your wife as they were doing, but they were given an upper limit for that. If you're going to do that, 4 months after this, there's no more, leaving her, aside and abandoned and whatever. If you're going to do it, then do it as a man. These ayat are telling you how to be a man. You will, either resolve the matter or you will divorce properly. So then the ayat here start to detail some aspects about divorce and the issue of 3 divorces, which may not be so obvious, but I'm going to clarify that inshallah in a moment, because what you see is divorce, at-talaqu marratan, there are 2 divorces. But here, of course, in the translation, we've got this helpful insertion here. You're welcome. So if a husband redivorces after the second divorce, فَإِن طَلَّقَهَا, right? So then it refers to the third talaq. And, these are things which are in the Qur'an, and yet it seems to me that people are woefully ignorant of these matters and astonishingly uninformed. And it's also a great indictment of our scholarly class that they're not teaching people the method of divorce. Not that we want to encourage divorce, but if it's going to happen, do it right. Because what's happening now is everybody is going, sorry to laugh, but just because I have a bad joke about this, I'll tell you in a second. What they go and do is they just say, talaq, talaq, talaq. And for some reason, it's in the public consciousness that to do talaq, you say it 3 times to enact it. Right? Which is not the case. The words of divorce are various. You can use different expressions, but anti taliq, ana utalliquki, these are in Arabic, right? So basically you are divorced, or and then issues of language and so on can be discussed. But the point is, you just say 1 time, and this brings about a process. It starts a process through which things will either come to an end or they will be resolved, because you have now, enacted something which was the kind of show the seriousness of the situation, right? So if a person grants the divorce or enacts the divorce 1 time, right? If they say anti taliq, now she has entered into the state of being a divorcee. And then there is the period of time which is mentioned here, right? There's a period of time which is called the iddah. And after that period of time, if you don't do raj'ah, that is to say, to take her back, then she is divorced from you and may go and do whatever and marry whoever, right? So there's no need to say it 3 times, right? The bad joke I was going to say is that people think it's like Beetlejuice, right? The movie's back in the theater now. You say Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. You say it 3 times to like invoke a demon or something. You say the name of that demon 3 times. And people are treating talaq like that. To invoke talaq, you have to say it 3 times. And when I said this, some people responded, yes, but the demon, la'natullah alayh, is very pleased with this situation. Because then it raises another question, have I now done the ultimate divorce, which is, then non-fixable thereafter, except in this way? So I want to apologize here that I'm jumping between the ayat, because I think I just want to give the broader picture, then we can get a bit more granular. But here after the 3rd divorce, they cannot get married again, right? So I'll come to that in a second. In these times, this is called talaq raj'i, which is a revocable divorce. So the first time he says anti taliq, you are divorced, various expressions. During that time, before the iddah has passed, this iddah here, before this has passed, he can say, okay, flowers, chocolates, let's sort it out, come back, right? We'll be husband and wife again. But then if the time passes and they are now like fully divorced, still after that, if say a few months pass and they say, well, I miss her so much, I miss him so much, and they can then come back together and do another nikah. Remember what nikah means, right? They can now do the aqd again. They can become husband and wife again. Yes, it has to be with aqd jadid. It has to be a new, fresh contract. They can't just come together as if they're still married. No, they were divorced, but they can marry again. But once the 3 has passed, you cannot marry again except under the very, very unlikely scenario which is outlined here, right? She goes and marries someone else, and implied here, not in the word tankiha, right, but from other evidences, that marriage would have to be consummated as well. And then that man divorces her, so she's now back on the market. After all that, it is allowed for that first husband and wife to marry again. Now, that's very unlikely. I know that there's some people who create artificial industry around this, which is very, very disgraceful. The Prophet ﷺ warned against it and cursed those who do this. But anyway, the point is that the whole point, and this is where I'll stop my introductory remarks, is stop messing around, and particularly messing the women around. Divorce, bring back, as many times as you want. You wait till it's almost time for her to go, and then you say, haha, no, actually, you're still my wife and you have no right. This is oppression. And these ayats are cancelling the oppression. And the following ayat on the next page also, various forms of oppression through which a woman is neither given her rights as a wife, nor is she allowed to go and find someone who will, right? So you have the choice of either, keeping her on and being a man about it and doing right by her, or being a man and letting her go, right? Not to exploit her, not to try to take away what you have spent on her or her mahr, just for the sake of, forcing her to, to give something so that you will grant her her freedom, right? So all of this is about cancelling oppression, providing the correct scope, the correct process. And I wish that more people knew this, and we need to educate our communities about how Allah Azza wa Jal has given us a system through which we can actually be given time to think. That's the point of this iddah. Time to think, time to, it's separation essentially, right? Because, you might say, okay, what about separation before divorce? That's literally what the divorce method is in the Islamic law, right?
And you're still in the same house, right, Ustadh Sohaib? I think that's important to note as well. I mean, generally speaking.
You would have to take care of her nafaqah and so on, but during this period, she's not fully divorced, nor is she fully your wife, right? So even when it says here they're husbands,
I guess there's that opportunity for interaction still, like even though they're in this semi-state, right? So there is the idea that they can go back together. There's an inclination towards one another.
If they were to, for example, have marital relations, then this is raja. That is now the divorce has been revoked.
And if the husband dies during that period, she will still inherit from him.
Oh, okay. So there's a kind of like there's a sort of semi-real usage of the word bu'ulatuhunna, their husbands, here, in that they are not fully their husbands, but not fully divorced until the monthly period is the 3 monthly periods, that's to say, in normal circumstances, or in the majority of cases, a woman is menstruating, and so the 3 monthly periods, as I'm sure we've seen in all the tafsir, there is debate between the scholars as to exactly what is intended by a qar', thalathat quru. Is it the actual menstrual period, or is it the purity period in between? Right, and there's certain implications for this difference, but one way or another, it has 2 functions. The first function is what they call istibra'ul rahim, to clarify that she is not pregnant, because if she's pregnant, then the other iddah is going to apply, which is mentioned in Surah Al-Talaq, right? If she is carrying a child, then it's until the child is born, she is in her iddah, and this has obviously serious implications for everyone if she is carrying the child of this husband, right? So there is then the clarity that, okay, she menstruated, therefore she is not pregnant. That can be achieved essentially by 1 monthly period. The 3 might be related to being absolutely sure about that, or it may be more about this time to think it over, time to reconsider. And during this time, she, has to be clear and honest about. Some say this refers to being pregnant or not. Some say it refers to the menstrual blood. But this is, but both really fall under that meaning. It would not be allowed to be deceptive about these things. And the husbands are granted the right to call her back into the marriage, as long as, in aradu islah.
Imam Harali says that generally the divorce is like an amana that has been placed in the hands of husbands, whereas the iddah and istibra is an amana that has been placed in the hands of the wives. So they've got more ultimate responsibility. These two things have been
So Ahmed, anything in particular?
I think you've covered most of it. Like, I mean, the Diana Tafsir kind of goes into the reasons. It talks about the 5 reasons that the divorce can be done for. The husband divorcing the woman, if there is some harm on the side of the woman, through the judge. The woman asking for divorce through paying the mahir, someone dying, and then someone leaving Islam. So that's probably what I could add. But
what was the dying got to do with divorce? If you're dead, you're not married anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons. It's less. I mean,
maybe this is something else a little bit different. Because if someone dies, you don't want to be married to them anymore, so you're not.
Yeah.
There's no need for divorce in that case. Just to mention, of course, as we said, this refers to those who have periods, and then in Surah Al-Talaq also we have the mention of those to whom this does not apply. Menopausal women are included in that, right? Or those who, for whatever reason, don't have periods, they are to do a taqdeer of this by months, right? Whereas if you have periods, it is the periods that are taken as the basis for the iddah. This is a very, the translation will never really, get how beautiful this is. وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Perfect. And in this, it implies that they, the women, and indeed women in general, wives in general, have rights similar to their obligations. So just as they have obligations, they also have rights. And by the same token, it's implied that men also have obligations and rights. But because there is a need to emphasize this part, which is overlooked, that you burden women with obligations, but you then must observe that she has her rights. just a kind of a tangential use of this, there's a narration that Ibn Abbas was combing his hair very nicely, and people asked him why does he tend to himself so nicely, and he said, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Fair is fair. My wife looks after herself and takes care of her appearance for me, and I have to take care of my appearance for her, right? I think this is, I don't know. I'm not the one to speak about this, but it's a wonderful sentiment, and also a beautiful way of taking the point made by the Quran within a specific context, and taking the message of that, the moral of that, and applying it to one's daily life.
Yeah. And here, for the men, it says, seeking their islah, because for the men, the word islah is used, implies that someone who keeps his wife only to later divorce her carries hypocrisy, says Imam Bukhari. It's a very dangerous thing. Unfortunately, I don't know how the situation in the UK, but in Australia, 90% of our imams are busy 90% of their times to do with dealing with these issues, if I'm not mistaken. So there's
and then there's also
a study done. Sorry to say, there's a study done and found that many of the imams are actually not very well trained or educated for these type of things. So it's a very,
you mean like in counseling and trying to resolve
counseling, but I think even from the perspective, from the ability to give khul'a and all that. I think Ustadh Ahmed did a panel, right? It's online. I'm not across that study, but they interviewed some 100 imams or something.
That was about faith issues, but yeah.
No, about divorce. Remember, you did a panel on divorce.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So it's there's higher purposes here, and oftentimes, like, who do you go to? Who can you trust? Who can women trust their matches with? That's I think more core to the issue. It's a difficult thing because you might want to encourage reconciliation, but then sometimes that turns into just be patient, and that has its place, but it has its limits as well. So it's from the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal and the mercy of the Sharia that divorce is there as a way out when necessary. And there's a very famous narration that the most hated halal thing to Allah is divorce. And there's some dispute over this hadith and its meaning, and there's a certain danger in overquoting that hadith, I think, out of place, because it might make you feel bad about doing something that's needed, right? But if we were to take the meaning, then it should be that Allah Azza wa Jal wishes for you to marry the right person and to stick to that, but He's not forcing you or judging you negatively, or blaming you or punishing you for seeking divorce when that is what and not necessarily just a purely extreme situation, but not for trivial things. And we have also big problems in the definition. People are now secretly talking about secret marriages and things like this, and marrying with the intention to divorce, and people trying to justify these things and to find something in a fiqh book that can cover for their actions. And it's just all so seedy, and it's so shady, and it's so unmanly. If you are a man who can provide, and I know that in our countries we have different kind of laws against polygamy, but if you have a situation that allows you to pursue such things openly as a man, bil ma'roof, right, then you have nothing to hide about it, you'd have nothing to fear about it, and you do right by everyone, and so be it. Yeah, our Sharia provides for that. And the problem is that many people are trying to do things, in an underhand way, and intending oppression, intending to oppress and to harm, and to get something out of it and not to give. But here, this, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ is like, just really says everything, right? It's about give and take. It's about shared love and responsibility.
Yeah, and the next verse, إمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان. Either you keep him in a good way or you fully divorce him in an ihsan, beautiful way. Like you said, you very, very rightly pointed out, it's as if Muslims come to these 2 pages and skip it. I know it's a bit difficult to recite. The tajweed is hard. There's a lot of qutb jad letters, and you know the gunna on the noon makes it extra hard. Yu'minna, but you know, we're coming this later, but because you're speaking about the general aim, later on, Allah SWT described these verses as a wa'ad, yu'adhu bihi. Imam Bukhari says, and it's been called a wa'ad is there's a meaning that whoever transgresses over the rights of someone else, Allah will he'll be sullita alayhi. Someone will come upon him to transgress over his own rights. Yeah, there's so much bil ma'ruf, and then there's some with the alif lam and some without the alif lam, and there's subtleties around that. But I think in Imam Ghazali's time, everyone was experts on this topic. That's why he said sometimes the fuqaha were called ulama al-hayd. That was a derogatory type of terminology. But in our times, I think the masses, like you said, don't know these simple things. I'll be very honest, even myself, like I had to ask myself simple questions. Okay, if the talaq from the first talaq is done and they separate after 3 months, is that do they need a full new marriage contract, or is that the one where she needs to get married again? But you just need to go over these rules again. My personal view is on this issue is that we've become almost Catholic when it comes to our perceptions of divorce. Like you said, because we're excessively quoting that hadith, the most disliked thing. And like you said, it's debated its authenticity. I was listening from Imam Majid Muhammad, the famous Imam from Washington, Virginia. He's constantly dealing with talaq issues. He just wanted to remind people this hadith is da'if. Please don't use it. He was pretty much encouraging people for talaq because how toxic the situation is getting. But on the other hand, just as we make talaq very difficult in our cultures, we've also made marriage very difficult. And that's why people are sometimes, it's not manly for them seeking these, other ways. And it's interesting, we're using the word, they're not men. It's not manly for them. Because the Quran says, وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. Because for true men, they have a right, but they have to be manly about it. But sometimes for men, because sometimes, I had friends, my teachers, even in Egypt, to get married, they needed to have a full 5 years of savings for the house and the car. So basically, sometimes marriage is also made extra difficult. These are common points. This leads to these problems.
So another thing that is sort of one of the focal points sometimes, or big discussions, is around the daraja that is mentioned here. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. And Ibn Ashur discussing this says that, look, this is a very tremendous point about equality, but it has to be understood also in a sensible way, because there are certain things that are different with regards to specific rights. So just from this whole page, we understand that men can effect talaq, women cannot. There is, as was briefly mentioned before, about khulu', which is indicated here, fi maftadat bih, right? This is this part here, right?
Could you just explain what that is, Ustadh Sohaib, for her?
So basically, for a woman to agree to give back the mahr and with certain maybe gifts or whatever, but whatever is agreed between them, to say, I'm really asking for you to divorce me. I don't want to be married to you. But if he is not willing to do it just for nothing, because he wants to keep her as his wife, right, then he may accept on this kind of basis. So that's khulu'. But then, again, this became a really big issue for the Sharia councils and so on. I'm not involved in them, so I don't know the particulars. But it's one of the main things that they have to do is to arbitrate on these matters and try to affect them legally as well. But again, like if somebody doesn't want to be married to you, I know there are so many complications. There could be children and joint ownership of assets and so on. Well, the marital life, if it's not working out according to its purposes, then it is better to come to an agreement that you can move on from that, as painful as it is. So the point is that I was indicating here is that there are certain things that men have. It's not here about its degree of right is kind of indicated here, so that might be one way of putting it. But they have been given some extra responsibilities, and you may call them rights at the same time, right? But is it a right, for example, as we, the ayah in Surah An-Nisa, الرجال قوامون على النساء, are you going to look at that as a right, that men are, the overseers and protectors, and some might translate it as in charge of women? Okay, even if you say in charge, your first way of hearing that word is, yeah, I'm in charge, right? Someone has written a book called Men in Charge, ? Right? But the point is, in charge itself, if you think more deeply about the word, means that you are charged with responsibility towards others, right? So you will also be asked, you are mas'ul, responsible. You have to give a response on the day of judgment as to what you did. So rights come with responsibility always. So yes, men, based on the way they are created, and women based on the way they are created, they have certain things that they are provided a kind of specialism in the Islamic law and system. And there are certain things which men have that women don't, and the same applies in reverse. But here the emphasis is on, here before, so that is just to clarify that. Don't take this statement to mean that in all things everything is a mirror image, but rather it is emphasizing the fact that they have their rights, which have to be observed, just as you have your rights that have to be observed. And Allah Azza wa Jal decrees all of this according to wisdom.
And just for the verse you quoted, Surah Nisa, the continuation says, because of what Allah has favored some upon the other. And the contemporary scholar says he takes that favoring to mean physical strength. وَبِمَا أَنْفَقُوا عَلَيْهِ, and because of what they spend. There's that financial element and the physical element. It's due to those, like Ustadh Sohaib said, responsibilities. So there's a bit of thing to that as well. Although some of our tafsirs that I was reading at, like there's a question about daraja. Some give it to reasons of spending, like I alluded to. Some say, some saw it even as intrinsically that a gender is more higher than other genders. These are, sometimes the tafsirs or thoughts, views. I personally feel like, without going too much against our tradition, we also need some contemporary tafsir to explain these concepts in contemporary times, particularly as Muslims in the West, because of the difficulties. The whole issue of you involve the governments or the family court systems or not.
That's right.
There needs to be that seems to be a bit grey for me personally.
Yeah. So if you've got anything that you want to raise like about some particularities of these ayahs, then please do. Otherwise, we can then move to the third page that we are
Maybe
addressing.
we should, Ustadh Saeed,
Yeah,
I just wanted to mention the hududullah, the boundaries, the limits. Imam Harali reminds us that there's the had of the Qur'an, but there's also the had of the Sunnah, and then there's the had of the scholars. And he quotes a hadith, like, to support that. So the hisab, he says, on the day of judgment will be based on the hudud of the Quran only. However, the person who tries to remain within the hudud of the scholars, or according to the hadith, the companions, are the least likely to breach the limits of the sunnah. And those who remain within the hudud of the sunnah are the least likely to breach the limits of the Quran. And just as a reminder that this talaq issue, like Ustadh Sohaib said, in Jahiliyyah times, they could give 1,000 divorces and it would just continue. And a poor woman will be in a state of constantly. So it's a bit like polygamy. Islam came to actually restrict this and tame it and make it in a proper way, It already existed. This is also... I got a bit enlightened by reading the tafsirs of understanding the Jahiliyyah practices around this. It helped me understand Islam's position in it.
Yeah, it's. I'm not sure I correctly understood Imam al-Harali's point there, but in a way, like what I did understand or misunderstand, I find that I have to qualify that a little bit by saying sometimes you could remain within the bounds of the scholars. The scholars, you know, or the legal scholars in particular, would set very wide bounds with regards to what's acceptable, because their job, especially in the context of, say, the courts, is really the letter of the law. So there are many things which could be lawful, even Islamically, in that sense, Islamic legally permitted, but it's just a bad thing to do, right? It's not within ma'ruf, and right. So we should read these passages with, you know, and with a close, you know, attention to how Allah Azza wa Jal is doing the wa'adh, as you said, or reminded us about the ayat that are going to come, that He is trying to get you to be a good person and to be a decent person and to be generous. As we'll say, وَلَا تَنْسَوُا الْفَضْلَ بَيْنَكُمْ. Don't forget the good times you had, and don't forget to be good to one another in the future, right? So we have to keep an eye on these things, because otherwise what the legal scholars permit is sometimes things that, you know, are not necessarily in line with being a good person. It's just that
No, I definitely agree with that.
it's where
Particularly
do
when
we
it
draw the
goes
line in
against the
law? We have to sometimes, you know, yeah.
And even this translation is that if you brackets arbiters. See, sometimes I read the tafsir as well. Sometimes they're saying, watch out, you can't take anything back from her, regardless of what you husbands or you arbiters want, you know, like, and that's been emphasized. You're right. The verses are, I think he said that more in a general context of just staying within the bounds of sunnah and a safer within the sharia. But in terms of this one, we should definitely keep the higher aims of ma'ruf and islah, as the Quran says. Jazakallah khair. So Ahmed, كأنك أردت أن تقول شيئا.
No, I'm just going to build on what you said before, but it's fine, no worries, inshallah.
So who would like to recite? I think that it's your turn. So جاء دورك.
All right. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذا طلقتم النساء فبلغن أجلهن فأمسكوهن بمعروف أو سرحوهن بمعروف ولا تمسكوهن ضرارا لتعتدوا ومن يفعل ذلك فقد ظلم نفسه ولا تتخذوا آيات الله هزوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم وما أنزل عليكم من الكتاب والحكمة يعظكم به واتقوا الله واعلموا أن الله بكل شيء عليم وإذا طلقتم النساء فبلغن أجلهن فلا تعضلوهن أن ينكحن أزواجهن إذا تراضوا بينهم بالمعروف ذلك يوعظ به من كان منكم يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر ذلكم أزكى لكم وأطهر والله يعلم وأنتم لا تعلمون والوالدات يرضعن أولادهن حولين كاملين لمن أراد أن يتم الرضاعة وعلى المولود له رزقهن وكسوتهن بالمعروف لا تكلف نفس إلا وسعها لا تضار والدة بولدها ولا مولود له بولده وعلى الوارث مثل ذلك فإن أرادا فصالا عن تراض منهما وتشاور فلا جناح عليهما وإن أردتم أن تسترضعوا أولادكم فلا جناح عليكم إذا سلمتم ما آتيتم بالمعروف واتقوا الله واعلموا أن الله بما تعملون بصير.
Jazakallah khairan. So the translation is as follows. Believers, when you divorce women and they reach their set time, then either keep or release them in a fair manner. Do not hold on to them in a harmful way to oppress them. Anyone who does this truly wrongs himself. Do not make a mockery of God's revelations. Remember the favor he blessed you with and the scripture and wisdom he sent to admonish you. Be mindful of God and know that he has full knowledge of everything. When you divorce women and they reach their set time, do not prevent them from taking their new husbands if they both agree to do so in a fair manner. Let those of you who believe in God and the last day take this to heart. That is more beneficial and purer for you. God knows, and you do not. Mothers suckle their children for 2 whole years if they wish to complete the term. And maintenance and clothing must be provided by the father in a fair manner. No one should be burdened with more than they can bear. No mother shall be made to suffer harm on account of her child, nor any father on account of his. The same duty is incumbent on the father's heir if he dies. So that, there's a bit of brackets here because there are also various views about this. The same duty is incumbent on the father's heir if he dies. If by mutual consent and consultation the couple wish to wean the child, they will not be blamed. Nor will there be any blame if you wish to engage a wet nurse, provided you pay as agreed in a fair manner. Be mindful of God, knowing that he sees everything you do. So, we would like to get started on these.
Maybe I could just mention a narration by Abu Musa al-Ashari. He narrates that the Prophet ﷺ once became angry at the Ash'ari tribe. Then Abu Musa went to him and asked, "O Messenger of Allah, are you angry with our tribe?" And the Prophet ﷺ said, "One of you says, I divorced her, then says, I took her back. This is not the appropriate way Muslims conduct divorce. Divorce the woman when she has fulfilled the term of the prescribed period." So the Idda term, Muqatil bin Hayyan says, he is the man who divorces his wife and says, I was joking, or he frees a servant or gets married and says, I was only joking. So just referring to verse 231.
What does he say? He's a man who?
He is the man who divorces his wife and says, I was joking, or he frees a servant or gets married and says, I was only joking. So
who's he in that sentence?
Sorry? He is the man. I'm thinking that referring back to the where onto them in a harmful way, like so referring back to the person who would do this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So, like, if a man wanted to and intend evil, he can keep the woman waiting for up to 9 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. Like Ustadh Sohaib reminded us, you can find heel shara'i, loopholes, legal loopholes to really harm one another. When you divorce your woman and they reach their set time, just Imam Tahawi reminds us, when they reach their set time, actually means when they're about to reach their set time. Because obviously once they've reached it, the divorce takes place. There's this thing in Arabic that when something happens and it's so close to it, it's as if it's happened. It's a general rule, just so we can all keep in mind, and it helps us sometimes when we face difficulties. That's why Ishaq alayhi salam or Ismail alayhi salam, whichever one it was, when he was laid down to be slaughtered, he was given the name Dhabihullah, but he was never slaughtered. He was never sacrificed. It was just because he got very close to it. And this verse is similar to it. Whereas verse 232, when it says, when your divorced women reach their time, in here it's literally when they've reached their time and it's done, now they're divorced, then don't stop them from being married. So the differences between the thing to say that. The word ma'ruf is being used. So if you're going to keep him with ma'ruf, nakira, or if you're going to divorce them with ma'ruf. Whenever I see the word tasrih, so Imam Harrali, he gives beautiful ways of definition. He goes, talaq is given for something which has the possibility of bringing it back. So talaq by its nature is raj'i. It's by its nature you can revoke it. But that was to do with the previous verse. In the previous verse, but at the end of it, it was called talaq fa in talaqaha, because after she marries another man, she can eventually come back. But normally another word he says would be used. Whenever I personally hear the word tasrih, I always think of difficult Muslims in prisons across the Muslim and the Western world, and that famous dua, Allahumma atliqum sarahan jamila. And I would just like to say this dua for them as well. And then Allah says, remember, so it says, do not make a mockery of God's revelation. That's because sometimes people don't intend to do harm, nor do they intend to disobey, but it's just because they're taking the religion lightly. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning against that. Be very careful, because there's no joke about this matter. Don't joke about God's signs. In Surah Tawbah, the munafiq says, what was it? They're saying we were only joking, and the Quran says, are you joking with God's signs? It's a very nifaqi type of attitude. So particularly with this. But then the verse continues saying, and then remember how he blessed you with the scripture and wisdom. And it's almost like it reminded me, as if we can say, when you're at this stage about to do divorce, وَأَحْسِنُوا كَمَا أَحْسَنَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكُمْ, then perhaps remember God's favors to you, so that it can also put you into an estate where you can do similar good favors for others without seeking a return. Remember, sometimes the best way of being motivated to do good is to just think of how Allah did ihsan to you. وَأَحْسِنُوا كَمَا أَحْسَنَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكُمْ. And then Imam Harali says, to finish it quickly, that the most severe type of threats in the Quran is the one which ends with God's knowledge. So when it says, and God has full knowledge of everything, is ashaddu tahdid here. Like, it doesn't even need to mention the punishment. It's left for your imagination. I'm just a bit confused. I mean, not confused, but so verse 232, and now I'm skipping, it's about the husbands, but the real addressee of the verb continues to be the caretakers. And apparently Imam Shafi used this verse as a proof that the wali needs to be always involved. Whereas for the Hanafis, because the verb was used hatta tankiha, it means she can, give effect. She can agree to her own marriage contract. But I don't want to get into that issue. My question is this, and maybe any one of you two can enlighten. Why would the walis prevent her from marrying again? I just want to understand why. What's in their benefit?
There's actually like a narration where it's about Michael bin Yasser, the husband of the sister of Michael bin Yasser. Michael bin Yasser. So she gives her sister in marriage to someone, and this Michael bin to Yasser, and then he ends up divorcing her. But then when they want to get back together, both of them want to get back together. The brother says no, like, you have dishonored, like, I have given my sister to you in marriage, but now you've and I'm not going to give her back to you. And then this ayah gets revealed, like, this is Ibn Abbas, one of Ibn Abbas' narrations, and the man says, and he agrees to allow her sister to get married again to that person. So
yeah, and you don't prevent them from going back to their former husbands. Is that how you're saying?
Yeah, that's, I guess.
I thought it meant, the brackets is that, so hey, maybe you've put new husbands, maybe there's some ikhtilaf or something, or I don't know. That makes sense. Unfortunately,
it would be it would be her new husband,
because the iddah is finished.
Yeah, it would be her new husband. It could be the same husband as it was. It doesn't have to be a different man.
Okay, yeah.
Because you can't say let her marry her husband. Because if it's her husband, then she's already married to him. So
yeah.
otherwise we just say azwajahunna. This is a majaz mursal alaqatu ma sayakun. So he will become her husband. So so it's like the wording is used to express what will be the case once they're married.
So this verse is really for them to go back to their former husbands. Is that the...
No, this is just one scenario, and maybe the sabab then links it to that scenario, but it doesn't limit it to that scenario. So this is a warning then to the ex-husband. For example, he could still interfere in certain ways, right? So even after the divorce, he starts maybe to spread rumors, or all sorts of ways a person can be a jerk, basically. Just let her be free, right? I have some notes that I wrote about this some years ago, and I pasted this in from the tafsir. Well, أصل العضل الحبس والتضييق, right? To capture and constrain someone. ومنه عضلت الدجاجة بالتشديد إذا نشبت بيضتها probably ولم تخرج. Basically, if the chicken is stuck inside the egg, so don't make her trapped inside an egg. Basically, is what let her be free to do. Like, she's an adult, and especially in the Hanafi school, where she's not dependent upon a wali in the same way. But even if the wali is there as the guardrail to prevent, again, forms of abuse and manipulation, and just to take care of, to ensure that her intent is then, met, but in a way that she is also guarded against, the machinations of men, right? Because also, like, here's the thing, men know men. I mean, I don't know how true this is all the time. Whenever someone has done something horrific, then everybody says, well, I didn't know about it and I didn't know about it. But someone must know, right? But just this morning, I was hearing on the radio about a horrific case in France of, a group of men, multiple people who had done something horrific to a woman, who's now, holding them to account publicly in a court case and waiving her right of anonymity as well. Anyway, I was just hearing that on the radio this morning, and it's bringing up this discussion about men who behave badly and how, where are the other men? Where are his friends? Where are the people that he chats to? Like, are they exchanging? Are they sharing notes? Do they at least hear about this? So here's the thing. How do we get onto this?
Yeah.
Because the thing is that, like, being a wali means that, look, someone might come and he looks like Prince Charming, and I don't have a sister, so I can say this just in purely hypothetical terms. My sister is absolutely head over heels in love with him, but I can see that he's a creep. And the thing is, because men know men, and they can see that, okay, look, it's in your interest, this person, there's something, no matter how impressed you are, there's something that you don't see. Right? So that's where the wali is supposed to guard her interest, not to just say, well, I don't like him, he's not my cup of tea. It's more like, I can see that there's something really that's going to be a problem for you. But, like, not to infantilize women, rather to protect their interests, but within the scope of what they want, right? Don't restrict them to what you want, right? And use them for your interests, and marry them to who is beneficial to you that they get married to, right? And this happens in the royal families, of course. It's not about you yourself, and even sometimes there are higher interests in marriage, and that's not negated, but there has to be compatibility. There has to be harmony is being pursued in the marriage situation, and not just political interests. The Prophet ﷺ married many women for clearly higher purposes. And when people ask the question, why did he have so many wives? Aside from the issue of its permissibility, is just that you look at each one and you see, wow, there was a principle being established through this marriage. But on top of that, of course, they were his wives. So, there is love, there is respect, there is care, there is harmony, and that is, essentially what marriage is for. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, that you would find repose and rest in each other.
Yeah, there's all those caveats like you mentioned, but the main thing, verse of 232, is to say, don't prevent them, the woman under your care, from marrying, right? If they both want to do so in a fair manner. So it's really a warning to the awliya of the woman, from what I see, or husbands as well. Like it's really warning against the bad version of what you're saying, because I was reading the word adl. It also comes from that famous saying da'ul udal, the incurable disease.
Oh,
it's one of the worst types of preventing someone. So it's really a negative word, and so yeah, the Quran is really preventing that. I mean, the scholars talk about this topic, which we won't go into it a bit. From my point of view, slightly controversial. Kufu'a, compatibility. I've definitely seen that extreme case of bad versions of it, and I know, at least only know the Hanafi fiqh stance of it, which is that the father has a right to void the contract, make it fasakh. But and the tafsir seems to bring that up in it, but I think sometimes, yeah, we need to write it also in a bit of a modern context too, because sometimes those things are a bit of cultural elements being used to explain concepts of their time. Allah.
So shall we then cover this last ayah in the time that we have?
Yeah, maybe, so we can start a clean thing next week. Although
I mean, it's not optional. I'm just asking nicely. We have to do it because now, in order to complete the surah, this will be our pattern from here on, inshallah.
So in the tafsir, they say su'alun. It's not for istikhbar. What was your su'al? It's a type of majazi su'al, but I can't think of the word.
Yeah, it was tahdid in reality. Halla.
Oh, للاستمرار. Let's continue.
So this is, of course, then referring to a situation that would be common at the point of divorce, and so there's an instruction here that mothers are to do this. Not, of course, an obligation. Not everybody is able to breastfeed, and so there are different situations, but it is mandub. Unless in such case where a child can only feed in this way, or they cannot find or afford a wet nurse, then it may become necessary in that case. And in other words, the mother has the first right to this role. She has the first right to be feeding her child. This can be related to divorce. It can be, as some of the scholars said, seen as more general. That is to say, it's talking about breastfeeding even within marriage. So if she is still a wife, then she gets the usual nafaqah rather than something specific for breastfeeding. And if in the context of divorce, then the idea is to urge the couple to ensure the welfare of the children, to emphasize the welfare of the child, and not, for example, to use the child as a means for revenge, doing things out of spite. The temptation is there, as in another ayah mentioned, وَأُحْضِرَتِ الْأَنفُسُ الشُّحْ. Your self-interest and your personal grievances will definitely bubble to the surface. But if you have children, especially now infant children we're talking about, you'll have to factor them in and care for them, and you may have to cooperate actively to achieve their interests. There's a question that so I didn't see your notes in Ibn Kathir, Ustadh Ahmed, but somebody once sent me a question, Ibn Kathir, because this point about it may be seen as being the limit That's to say, you cannot breastfeed past 2 years, right? But rather, it is a kind of indicative maximum, rather than say like a legal maximum, an absolute. Because in certain circumstances, there may be some who breastfeed a little past this, but Allah Azza wa Jalla is setting it as a kind of natural endpoint for the breastfeeding. And even it can be, the weaning can happen earlier than this as well. So we can either read this liman arada an yutimma ar-rida'a, to say this is the limit for whoever wishes to perform the maximum, or the mothers do this on behalf of the fathers who intend to perform the maximum. But after 2 years, it is not legally counted as suckling, right? So the thing from Ibn Kathir that someone raised with me was Ibn Kathir quoted.
It's in there, but I didn't actually include it, Ustadh Saeed, but yeah, continue, inshallah.
Yeah, so he quoted something about maybe it's harmful past 2 years. And the person who wrote to me was like someone who's particularly interested in breastfeeding and the health implication. They said, their point of view, and I'm saying this is just that person's point of view as well, was that breastfeeding past 2 years is perfectly fine. And why is Ibn Kathir, saying here that it could be harmful to the baby's body or brain, right? So I said, look, first of all, Ibn Kathir is not a medical professional, and if he were, then he's a medical professional from centuries ago, and that's not how we base our medical opinions, is on books of tafsir, great as they are. And even in this, he was quoting something from al-Tabari, and even al-Tabari was saying, وَالذَّكَرَ, yeah. So Ibn Kathir is quoting al-Tabari in this respect. And al-Tabari also was not a medical professional as far as I know. And if he was, then it was many centuries ago. So the question of, is it healthy, is it harmful? We might, draw some kind of impression of that from the ayah, but it's not what the ayah is saying, right? So scholarly opinions about that, we take them with respect, but we don't take them as a binding, as medical advice, right? So within the scope of what the ayah says, one could understand that breastfeeding can go past 2 years, but it's just now consider that you're doing something beyond the expected limit, right? And it will not be legally counted as such, and these things will not hold, right, past the 2 years. But if you decided to wean earlier, this is also fine, as the ayah indicates.
Yeah, I don't know why, but Imam Baqai also says it alludes فَأَفْهَمَ أَنَّهُ يَجُوزُ الْفِطَامِ لِلْمَصْلَحَةِ قَبْلَ ذَلك. You can wean it earlier. وَأَنَّهُ لَا رِضَاعَ بَعْدَ تَمَامٍ. Because
liman arada, so it just sounds like that. So whoever wishes to complete the maximum, but not like a binding to complete the maximum.
No, I know, but then the second part, وَأَنَّهُ لَا رِضَاعَ بَعْدَ التَّمَامِ. So he's saying...
yeah, so it's not counted as a rida'a after the tamam. But it's not saying it's now prohibited to breastfeed.
Yeah, I see. So if a child has it after 2 years, a stranger's milk, he doesn't become mahram to that person or to their progeny.
This would be another set of rulings. But we're talking here about the rida'a of the mother or the wet nurse. Yeah.
Okay, it's not.
So nobody would start after
financial obligations don't exist. You're saying.
Would anyone start after 2 years with a new mother? This would be a highly unusual situation. There has been some controversial, let's say, hot takes out there. Very famous case in Egypt of a scholar who suggested that one could do this as adults and whatever, and it's it's been very roundly criticized and mocked.
Yeah, Ibn Kathir actually includes that narration from Aisha radiallahu anha about Salim, and so yeah, he talks about that as well. But yeah, I guess I didn't include that.
The hadith, if I'm not mistaken, since Sahih Muslim and all the Muslim scholars agreed that la yu'malu bihi. It's not.
Yeah, that's true. And then he mentions.
There's definitely an ishkal in this, in terms of the practical implications of that, because what would be involved in an adult breastfeeding. Obviously, there's an obvious haram part of that, right? It doesn't even need explaining. But then are you talking about like expressing into something? And this is just, if it were a solution, then the Muslims would have acted upon it. but it is not acted upon.
Yeah, that thing you mentioned, Sohaib, actually, Ibn Kathir says that he says it's in Ibn Jarir's tafsir that after the second year, it harmed the child's body and mind. So yeah, it is there.
But
specifically, I was asked about this because and I needed to explain that actually the translation of Ibn Kathir
it's very important, actually. Yeah.
But is that his opinion, or he gives a riwayah?
No, I think he after that he also says that Sufyan al-Thawri narrated that Al-Qama asked the woman who was suckling her child after the second year ended not to do that. So I think to further support this, he also narrates that as well. So it looks like it's something that perhaps he might have taken up.
It's just it's an opinion.
Yeah.
But it's verging onto a medical opinion, isn't it? Like the ayah, is not saying anything about harms past 2 years.
And sometimes it's the scholars, they're doing ijtihad to understand the human fitra or the science of them based on these verses, and they could be right or wrong. Before we read the page before about the Ila incident, where a man says to his wife, that you're no longer my wife. It says she waits for 4 months. And Imam Harali says, Allahu Alam, he says, perhaps this is a period that the maximum a woman can stay away from her husband. So he's trying to arrive at a biological phenomenon of women and their desires. And he even quotes the incident when Sayyidina Omar asked women, how long can you guys bear to be away from your husbands? And they said 6 months. And after that, he stopped sending the soldiers for longer than 6 months at a time to not cause fitna. So it's their way of trying to arrive. So it could be like Ustadh Sohaib said, muwafiq li reality, or we might have stronger evidence. But it's not based on khabar marfu, it's not based on hadith or something. No.
Yeah. Okay, inshallah.
We did it. We did 3 pages.
Alhamdulillah.
Not ثلاثة قروء, but ثلاثة صفحات.
Yeah. Should we wrap up there then?
Inshallah, I think this is a good place to perhaps stop.
Should we do فصال عن تراض وتشاور? So we just we'll wean ourselves.
I'm curious why they don't use the word infitam, but fisal and taradin. Maybe there's more wisdom in that. We'll discuss next week, inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay.
No,
Yeah, right.
all right, inshallah. Barakallah fikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Tomorrow morning I'm going to go